worthlessness, same as valuelessness or lack of esteem, impotence of will or powerlessness, lack of recognition, being ignored, overlooked, treated like one doesn't exist, lack of sense of animation, feeling inwardly numb, dead, bored. We don't feel that sense of arousal the ego depends upon. And feelings of confusion about your identity. All of those feelings represent a state of negation of the ego, from which we have separated ourselves and therefore eliminated our natural wholeness. When we stand as a fragment of the whole that we are in a pathological state, developed by the state of subject-object duality, in which we have treated our painful feelings of negation, our feelings of insecurity, same as vulnerability, helplessness, so forth, worthlessness, powerlessness, and so forth and so on. We treat those feelings as though we disown them, as though they are not self. We treat them as though they are not a part of our wholeness, and that is the pathological state that has to be healed, unified with, so that the healing effect is the same as the growth effect. We are no longer fixated on a continued identification with these immature feelings of insecurity, worthlessness, weakness, helplessness, being a psychological nothing and a nobody, an inner sense of lack of inner substance, confusion in our identity. As long as we reject those feelings, like conscious awareness, and there's a split between a subject-object separatedness, a two-ness, a duality, these feelings become fixated. They can't move into conscious awareness, be unified, speak and drain out, and be transcended. We remain fixed on our continued identification with this feeling of negation that's inherent in the feeling of insecurity, worthlessness, powerlessness, weakness, helplessness, insubstantiality, and so forth and so on.
I have a question.
Sure.
It seems like a large problem that people have is they say they feel insecure.
Yeah.
So a person comes in and says, I feel terribly insecure. So how does that fit into this? Because they're someone who recognizes a feeling of insecurity.
Right. They have, in a sense, gone beyond all of this, and assuming that they're aware of the feeling of insecurity, was a feeling of negation, and we want to ask them insecurity about what? We're asking what aspect of the ego feels unstable. Insecurity just means I have some feeling of lack of control. In other words, my sense of security depends upon my ability to control. Through my ability to control, I feel not vulnerable. The ego can't be destroyed. I'm afraid somehow that if I can't control, that all things can come to me, all kind of pain, all kind of annihilation. So when the patient says, I feel insecure, they quite often are really saying, something has happened in my life, I don't feel I have control over my life. Things are happening without my control. Okay. So you want to ask them then, assuming that they see that association, what happens when you can't control? I feel terribly insecure. Okay. Now be with that feeling of insecurity. What are you afraid is going to happen now? Let's assume that you can't control, which of course is true for all of us. We can't control. But we don't realize that subconsciously we try to generate a sense of security, a very pretended sense of control, through the power of our will to produce an effect out there so we don't feel completely vulnerable, completely defenseless to whatever pain might arise. So there is a such thing as insecurity. It's just the perceived sensation of the inability to control. So if something happens you don't expect, you begin to feel like you're not controlling your world, you start to feel insecure. Okay, so what happens when you feel insecure? What are you afraid is going to happen now? You bring the client into the feeling of insecurity because it's going to lead to a feeling of ego negation, which if accepted is the therapeutic effect. Let's explore it if you wish.
But the person already comes in feeling insecure.
Sometimes, but you don't know what that insecurity is all about. It may be a cover over for something else. That's just a verbalized label. What does insecurity mean? They're fearful, no? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if they're fearful, it means what? Because when they say insecure, they quite often aren't talking about anxiety. They're talking about somehow the lack of control over their world, which they assume makes them insecure, because they assume that when they were in control, they were secure. And so they assume that when they're not in control, things are happening without their control, they naturally assume they're insecure, therefore assuming something terrible is going to happen. So what is insecurity? What is anxiety? Isn't that a threat to the ego sense of negation? So you're saying to me, I'm the client, you're saying to me, so what if you're not in control? What do you expect will happen then?
I'll lose everything.
Very good. What makes you think you'll lose everything? What everything will you lose?
I'll lose my house, I'll lose my family, I'll lose my pet.
Can you show me how the fact that you can't control everything necessarily means that you can't control anything? How will you lose your house? Because you can't control the weather, or because you can't control your friend dying, or because you can't control the fact that you have an illness and you can't put it away by conscious willful effort, or whatever the insecurity is about. Then you get into the delusion that because I can't control everything, something terrible is going to happen to me. That's always the basic conclusion. Something terrible is going to happen. How do you know that? You get into the experience that says when I couldn't control my parents, that's when they threatened me with abandonment, with rejection, with worthlessness, or whatever the feeling may have been. Somewhere along the way, the ego is saying, as long as I can control, I can make sure that I preserve my sense of self. If I can't control, I can get annihilated. Eventually, we have to bring the client into that feeling where it's okay to feel no control. What will happen then? Both security and insecurity will both drop out. Clear? In other words, if it's okay for me to have no control, there is no insecurity. If there's no insecurity, there's no need for security. A need for security only covers a rejection of a feeling of insecurity, no? That a need for worth only exists because I reject the feeling of worthlessness. If I have no feeling of worthlessness, would I have a need for worth? If I don't reject the feeling of powerlessness, helplessness, weakness, impotence, vulnerability, whatever I call it, do I have a need for power? They both drop out. The whole conceptual ego gets transcended. If I don't feel insecure, will I need security? Through control? You have to ask yourself, how else can you feel secure except through some kind of control? Because security is not a real thing, it's only a sensation produced. A conclusion based upon your pretense that you are not vulnerable to some kind of pain that can annihilate or negate the ego. We'll get into all that in much more depth when we bring up specific cases, and you can see how quickly. The important thing is to look at the behavior, see what it's saying, look at the conscious thinking, see what needs this motivated behavior and thinking is saying is being pursued. If you reverse it to its opposite, if you see that a person's behavior and conscious thinking is involved with generating a sense of power, you reverse it to its opposite. How do you feel when you can't generate that sense of power? Powerless, helpless. What's so terrible about that? You let yourself feel that and see what the pain is. In most cases in therapy, we go around in circles. We go in breadth. We don't go into the depth necessary to produce psychological therapeutic movement. And then ultimately, once we get to the feeling of negation as being rejected, the feeling of insecurity, worthlessness, weakness, helplessness, lack of recognition, feeling of being a nobody, inner deadness or boredom, whatever it may be. And that's accepted, then the need, of course, also falls away, and there is a healing effect because there is no longer the rejection of this feeling that threatened my ego sense of continuation. And therefore, I am no longer a fragment. I am now whole again. And if I do this with all my rejected feelings, I am totally whole again. And wholeness is healing. Wholeness is health. As long as I continue rejecting these feelings, I remain fixated upon those feelings. What that means is I remain fixed upon continued identification with the feeling of negation in them. I remain fixed, for example, on a conviction that I'm insecure. No matter how much money and power I build, I remain convinced that I'm worthless. No matter how much fame and fortune and all the rest that I build, I have conviction that I'm worthless. I've worked with a client that was intelligent, had a big job, making a lot of money, good family, still comes in and says, I feel worthless. But it makes no sense in terms of reality. Of course it makes no sense in terms of reality. The fixation is still there. The conviction, I am worthless. And as long as that remains separated from conscious awareness, there is a state of fragmentation within my whole being, which is pathological. So as long as this fragmentation, the separatedness is not undone, pathology persists. No matter what you're doing on the surface up here, you are still not the whole being you were, because you have now become a fragment of that whole being, having rejected this part of yourself. Your feelings of weakness, helplessness, vulnerability, insecurity, worthlessness, lack of recognition, whatever you have done. So you see, as long as that remains a division within you, there is no therapeutic effect. Something has to be healed here. That which has been rejected has to be unified so that you are no longer a fragment of your wholeness. You are now your true wholeness, because you now include all feelings within you as a related part of yourself. Not a fragmented, disowned, rejected part that says, this is not me. These feelings of worthlessness, they're not me. These feelings of helplessness, weakness, insecurity, they're not me. I'm only this part here. I disown these feelings, drop them into the darkness of the subconscious, pretend they don't exist. So once my whole being was this, now my being has become shrunk to this. That is pathology. And until I expand, meaning until I grow to include what I have rejected, which means the outgrowth of my continued fixation upon believing that I am insecure or worthless, as I did from childhood on, there's no therapeutic effect. I'm still in a state of self-division, split, tunage.
So would you say that the person who comes in and says that they feel insecure is actually saying, I feel this, but I really shouldn't feel this. I want to feel secure.
They really are basically saying, I feel a need to feel in control.
Okay.
Their magical sense of omnipotence, the early child's sense of omnipotence, which makes it feel it is the center of the universe, and controls everything in it. That delusion is being threatened. As long as things were going fine, all of a sudden a friend dies, all of a sudden your parent dies, all of a sudden you get sick, very sick, and you can't control it. All of a sudden things are happening in your world that you didn't expect, and you start to feel, oh, I guess the world does not obey my omnipotent will. I'm not in control of it. Therefore, anything can happen to me. Oh my God, anything can happen to me. And so the whole delusion of control goes out the window, and the whole delusion of security that was based upon that control goes out the window, and they come in fearful. They might say I'm fearful. They might say I'm in a panic state. They might say I feel insecure. They may put it in a variety of different terms. So, in many therapies, the client comes in and says, I need a new sense of control. The therapist will try to provide them with a sense of control. Instead of dealing with how you feel, but you don't have that sense of control. Because that feeling has been negated, rejected from conscious awareness. Therefore, that is a pathological state. Unless you unify with that again, you remain less than whole. True wholeness means health. True wholeness means healing. You can't remain divided from yourself and be in a psychological state of healing or growth. So I remain fixated at this childlike level where I still feel as insecure as I ever did. Because this is what the feeling is saying I am. Or worthless, or powerless, or helpless, or regardless of what's happening in my life, I still feel in my gut level scared, insecure, vulnerable, destroyable. I feel a little fragile, as the child used to feel, because it's very easy for the early ego to be destroyed. It was so tenuous and non-developed. And no matter what's happening today, we still feel that way at the gut level. So many therapists don't know how to get to this level, so they pretend no such thing exists. Let's deal with what we can get at, and that's conscious cognitions and behaviors, and do therapy with that. Now, if you see the foolishness of that, that's just a self-deceit, saying that because we can't get at that, don't know how to deal with that, we'll pretend it doesn't exist, and we'll deal with what we can have access to. And call therapy some kind of misthinking, which of course it is, because as long as I feel worthless, my thoughts are going to center around my worthlessness, and my behavior is going to try to generate a sense of worth. So you'll constantly tell me, look, it's irrational for you to, as Ellis might say, doesn't make any sense, ABC method. You have no reason to feel so worthless. As though ergo, therefore you don't feel worthless. But worthlessness is not a cognition. Worthlessness is a feeling. It's something you feel at the gut level. Insecurity is not a cognition. Insecurity is the tummy trembling with the fear, I'm going to die. Dealing up here reinforces the pathology because it separates you even further from that which you have rejected, perpetuating the state of duality with yourself, two-ness. So you pretend, no, I'm not insecure, I'm in control. This is my self-concept up here, powerful, in control, worthy. I'm not worthless. I am worthy. Look at all that I've accomplished. Up here you keep telling yourself cognitively, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy. At the gut level, you're feeling worthless. So you say to yourself, but it's irrational because look what I've accomplished. What difference does it make if it's irrational? It will continue until you let it be conscious and you have regained your wholeness again. It has to be okay for you at times to feel worthless, to feel valueless, to be given a drop of esteem by somebody. It's okay to feel helpless and weak. These are all temporary feelings we all have to live with. And if all of them are acceptable, we are whole. We don't fragment ourselves, make this a fragment, and make this a fragment. This is the fragment standing as the positive self-concept, worthy instead of worthless. So instead of our whole being, we become two fragments at war with each other. Our whole life is a war between am I worthy or am I worthless? I'm saying your whole being is beyond both opposites. Both concepts are just ideas. Your whole being, which if you could feel without the concepts of the opposites, is a different kind of feeling entirely. It's an inherent sense of joyfulness.
Could I say something?
Sure.
It seems to me that there is a reason for those feelings. That instead of, we're not just getting back to the feelings and acknowledging the feelings and accepting them,
Yes.
but that those feelings exist there for a reason. There was some original.
Not necessarily. It can be a kind of irrational assumption.
But what I was saying is, to take from what you said about Albert Ellis as irrational, they aren't irrational because they may seem irrational now that the person is an adult, but when the feelings began as a child or adolescent,
They may still have been irrational. I mean, not. They may have, in other words, the child may still feel I'm going to be abandoned if I don't get A's in school because my brother is getting A's in school. If I don't
but
get
that's
A's.
not. I mean, that on one hand that is irrational, but on the other hand, it's a way of understanding something that's going on in the world.
That's right. But what I'm saying is it may have been in that moment irrational because the parents would not have rejected him.
Mm-hmm.
He only felt they would.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point of view, his belief is his own irrationality. I'm convinced that would have been the consequence. I was convinced that if I'm abandoned, I will die.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it may not have been real at all. But the fact that I'm convinced of that, I operate under that conviction. But it doesn't make any difference whether it's real or not. My mother may have died, and I might have felt guilty that I killed her. Maybe irrational, but I was still operating under the conviction that I deserve punishment, and that I'm worthless, and that I'm no good, and I don't want to stop punishing myself because I don't know how to expiate the guilt. Up here, you see my behavior is very self-defeating, very self-punishing. I'll bring you a case similar to that so you can see how quickly we get into the problem, you see. So, for Ellis to say, well, you have no need to feel that, as though somehow through conscious effort, I can change what subconsciously I'm feeling in different dimensions. If we could, there'd be nobody in the state hospital. If we could, through conscious effort, make ourselves think only beautiful thoughts, who would ever be in the state hospital? The truth is you can't control your thoughts. You only think you can distract yourself for the moment, but the thoughts are not created conscious. The thoughts are created at the subconscious level. They trickle up, and you either accept them or you block them. If you accept them and reject them again, they become preconsciously fixated. If you don't accept them in the first place, they become subconsciously repressed. It's different between suppression and repression.
There's one other comment something that you said last week about needing to differentiate in order to have a continuity of psychological time. And I was thinking about this week, and it seems to me that a person, from my experience, a person who is fixated at this state here would not have a sense of continuity in psychological time. That, well, could I use an example?
Sure.
well, it's a personal example, but my mother died when I was 11, and for many, many years, like 15 or 20 years, there was no time sequence in that event at all. Like every day was the day she died, practically. So there was no sense of continuity in that one element.
Yes.
But now, of course, I do have a sense of continuity in time now. But for a lot of years before I was able to deal with her death, that's what occurred to me when you said that about needing that continuity in psychological time.
Yes. It's the self-concept, though, that has to be in continuity in time. And even though years were going by, and you were not aware of that, you were, in a sense, the same self over that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
You may have been the same little girl, guilty self, or responsible self, or abandoned self, or whatever you were feeling, you see, during that particular period of time, but there was a sense of continuity for you over that period of time. Otherwise, you can't feel comfortable with yourself. And that's why in many cases we identify with negative self-concepts, because that has been our continuity over time. And we're afraid we can't validate a positive self-concept, so we hold to the negative just to have some kind of self-concept, so the ego can feel some sense of differentiation conceptually. So I may feel like a bad person, I may feel like a worthless person. You have a difficult time trying to change my cognitions about myself, not realizing that I can't afford to change my identity, because if I do, I'll have no identity at all. I believe that I can affirm a negative self-concept. I can be nasty, I can be hostile, I can do things to validate my negative self-concept. But if you make me look at a positive self-concept, I'm afraid I can't validate that, I'll have no self-concept and no means of continuity over time. So even though you were in this terrible state, however many years it may have been, there was a sense of continuity over time for you, meaning during this particular period of time, you were maintaining the same view of yourself, and therefore feeling somehow that you exist, whatever that view may have been. In fact, at some subconscious level, you may be continuing to maintain that view of yourself. What some clients will do, you see, that's what we have to get at. The feeling of, I was somehow responsible then, or I was abandoned then, I still feel abandoned, I still feel insecure, whatever the consequence may have been of the death, our reaction to the death is what produces the feeling, not the death itself. Our reaction to it making us feel lonely, abandoned, insecure, worthless, guilty, whatever. And we retain that feeling, and quite often at the subconscious level, we have that continuity over time. I'm a bad person. I don't deserve anything good to happen to me. And you keep saying to people, look, you're a decent person. You are intelligent, you're sensitive, you're attractive. You don't, dealing up here, you have no justification for hating yourself. That's what should be. So I told you basically in psychotherapy, if you want to go quickly, you deal with what is, not what should be. What is you hate yourself. Can we explore why you do? Rather than you shouldn't hate yourself, there's no justification for it. We're helping the client to continue to reject the feelings of worthlessness or whatever it may be, and operating in here with more pleasant thoughts, which remains conflict with what I'm really feeling. I'll give you one more example of that. A client comes in and says, I want you to teach me how to motivate myself. I'm not motivated to study. Oh, sure, I've got all kinds of techniques. First thing you do to motivate yourself is you tell yourself it's important, and so forth and so on. That's what should be. Therapy, it never works when you take the person away from what is to what should be. The truth is you are not motivated. Can we examine that, please? Let's see why you're not motivated. And as you explore it with me, you may find that I hate what I'm studying. I'm in the wrong major. I shouldn't be in this field in the first place. If you get me motivated, you take me away from the truth of myself, which is I don't want to do this work. I don't like this work. This work is not me. Or whatever else is the cause of my lack of motivation. So therapy is not giving me what I say I need. It's helping me recognize that the need is compensation. It's the should be. I should feel worthy. I should feel secure. I should feel powerful. I should be recognized. I should feel alive and stimulated. I should be all male or all female, whatever my identification is. Those are shoulds. And the should always takes you away from the what is, the reality, the experiential reality. And any therapy that takes you away from the experiential reality, takes you away from reality, is pathological by nature. Whatever takes you away from reality is pathological in nature. A therapy to be really therapeutic has to bring you in greater contact with the reality of yourself, and ultimately without a reality, because if I'm afraid to face my feelings of insecurity, I will reject contact with certain realities out here that are capable of triggering my feelings of insecurity. Or not. I'll be afraid to apply for certain jobs, and I'm afraid to reach out for certain relationships. Because if I do and I fail, this insecurity will be triggered, and I can't accept that, you see. So I can't accept, I start negating much of the world. As I negate my feelings, because I feel negated, I start constricting my whole life. I'm starting to live only up here in what should be. The client says, teach me some techniques of motivating myself. You say, sure, you come to the right place. I got a bag full of these techniques. You see, you have to understand why that's not therapeutic. Why it may make me feel better. Alcohol makes me feel better too. Or false relaxation. You know, my tension is being caused by the conflict here. If I really relaxed, I would have finally relaxed my conscious awareness. It would come to the place of tension related to my rejection of this feeling. So I can't deeply relax. So the technique is you up here, to try to relax me up here so that you can pretend that you're getting your money's worth. Meaning, I tell you to make yourself tense, as super tense as you can, which you can do consciously, and then relax yourself. So that by contrast to the hypertension you've made consciously, by contrast, you'll feel relaxed when you relax that tension. But you haven't relaxed this tension, which is the real tension. You see the make-believe game that's played by many therapists. They pretend that they're helping you to relax by helping you to relax only at this level, in which you have the conscious control over tensifying yourself, and therefore the conscious control over releasing that tension. And when you release that consciously created tension, by contrast, of course, you will feel more relaxed. It will last a few minutes, you see, until you leave the office. But eventually, this tension here creeps up again. The patient is afraid to fully relax. If you fully relax, see what happens. Your awareness falls from the surface to where the repressed feelings are. If you fully relax, you would fully relax past all of this into your true center here, where your real self is. Don't get into that at all. Full relaxation would be beyond the whole radius of your existence into the center of your existence. So you can't relax, because as soon as you relax, you hit this area here where there is tension, and that sends you right back up to consciousness. And as long as you continue to be in a state of self-division, subject-object two-ness, duality, you are split, you are fragmented. This fragment is separated from this. I disown this. This is not part of my being. I am only this, relative opposite. I am only power. I am not weakness, helplessness. I am a somebody. I am not a nobody. I am these feelings of aliveness and not this feeling of numbness, because I've numbed all my feelings, so I don't feel them. When you understand this, you'll move from the behavior to the thinking, to the needs right away, and then to the feelings of negation underneath them, which are the opposites. And you got into therapeutic effect very quickly. You can do it the first session. If you understand how to hear all that, I'll show you how to do that when we get into the examples of the cases. I just want to show you that therapy is never dealing with what should be, because all the should-bes are here. The what is here. And so if I say to you, I'm feeling worthless, I should feel worthy, can you help me choose a right major so that it will help me feel worthy? Can you teach me how to relate better so that I can get a sense of worth from my relationships? And say, not me, buddy, I'm not doing that. I want to know why you feel worthless. I want to see where that comes from. Because I can't presume that you must continue to hold that. If you continue to hold that, I'm not helping you at all. The pathological state of self-division, of self-contraction, of undoing your natural wholeness will continue. And you will have fear and you will have pain. As long as this feeling threatens to arise, or anything to threaten this particular feeling arising, will cause anxiety, what we call psychological threat or awareness of our negation. Because if I'm worthless, then that's proof that I'm a nothing. I'm totally negated as an ego, same with powerless, same with non-recognized. I don't exist if somebody doesn't recognize me. I don't exist if there's no finite sense of animation going on within me, no sense of arousal. I can't find anything that is me then. All these represent the ego's needs that affirm its sense of existence. And all these feelings that are fundamental to therapy represent the opposite of these, or the ego sense of negation. And therefore the client does not want to be conscious of those. The client believes that if I become conscious of these, I will feel negated as an ego. Who wants to feel worthless, insecure? helpless, weak, vulnerable. But that's how you felt at one point, buried that feeling, pretended that feeling is not related to you, that you could actually disconnect, psychologically disconnect from something you yourself create. You being the parent, the consciousness that creates, the consciousness substance that creates all of these experiential forms. You are all your feelings. You are the wholeness that not only is all your feelings, but the wholeness that creates and knows all your feelings, which is beyond all your feelings. It's like the ocean, beyond all the waves and bubbles and ripples. The wave as substance is beyond all the forms, waves, bubbles, ripples, foam, whatever that may be. Your real being is beyond any feeling and all feelings. But you're not only not that whole being, you're not even the fragments of the forms you've created. Because you're saying some feelings, sometimes even all feelings, threaten my identity as a male. Males aren't supposed to have feelings. Or threatens my identity as powerful, because a feeling can be lost control over, and therefore I'm not this intellectual controller is in control of my feelings, which is my identity up here. So as long as your whole being has become fragmented, you're in a pathological state, and whatever doesn't help you to unify and become whole again is not a real therapy. Because it preserves this duality, this state of fragmentation, this state of self-rejection. Now, we had more time, I would show you how this process works relatively quickly, how we undo this barrier so that this can start to flow up by itself spontaneously, so a healing effect can start to take place. That's what we'll get into hopefully eventually. But I want to show you, perhaps for example, maybe even today, how quickly, that if you understand all this is motivated by this, which is compensation for this, how quickly you'll be able to reveal this and get into therapeutic effect. Sure. And how all of this is really therapeutic movement. As long as you're moving from this motivated behavior, motivated thinking, related to trying to generate these compensatory needs, then eventually you can move into the relative opposite feelings of deficiency or ego negation that all these needs are covering. Obviously, if I didn't feel insecure, I'd have no need for security. If I didn't feel worthless, I'd have no need for worth. If I didn't feel weak and helpless, I wouldn't have any need for power. So we must understand that all ego motivation reflected up here is really reflecting this at the preconscious level. So you have this at the conscious level, this at the preconscious level, this at the subconscious level. And those are the levels you've got to get through. You're not going to get to the ego-threatening feelings of negation, you see, until you get to the needs. Then you can say to the client, what happens if you don't do this as a way of getting a sense of power? What if you don't take the alcohol as a way of feeling secure? Don't take the alcohol one time, see what happens. Feelings of insecurity will start to trickle up. Sure, if that's what it's covering.
So you explain ego motivation to reconfirm itself, but what is real motivation, and where does that come from?
Yes, real motivation, I don't know if we should get into that now, but real motivation comes from our real individuality, our real self, which is at the center of our being. It's not on the ego-mind radius of our being. That's why if you have all this junk, you see, repressed, you can't really hear your real inclinations, your natural potentials and abilities. We are like seeds in there that naturally want to grow and blossom, fully become actualized, made actual from potential. And so we all have natural potentials and abilities, which are a life energy substance, that we quite often don't hear and don't want to hear, because we're so busy trying to become what is ego compensating. You see, so if I have a natural, whatever, creative ability, natural ability with people, natural ability, mechanical, it doesn't make a difference what kind of natural abilities. But I have a need for worth, then I might go into a field that will elevate my worth. I will go into a relationship that will elevate my worth. I will not find a partner that I'm really compatible with based upon who I am. I will not find a job that is basically an expression of my natural talents and abilities and potentials. I will pursue what egotistically helps me to reject these opposite feelings that threaten the ego sense of negation. They are ego-negating feelings, or ego-deficiency feelings. So when the ego feels deficient in a sense of worth, it feels threatened with negation as an ego. When it feels impotent, it has no power, it's no agent of any kind, it's no cause of effects. and therefore it feels threatened with a continued sense of existence. And so my whole life becomes oriented around these egotistical needs and not around finding a life partner or finding a life's work or whatever else I may do that is consistent with my natural potentials and abilities and my natural urge to actualize those potentials, which becomes my real motivation once the ego motivation falls away. As long as the ego motivations dominate me, you'll find my behavior and my conscious thinking will all relate to these needs, psychological needs which help the ego feel it is something, in contrast to the negated feelings, negative self-concepts. Negative self-concepts are thoughts about yourself as negated as an ego. Therefore, you are negated as an ego when you are negated in your sense of worth. So you have a negative self-concept, but you're worthless, or valueless, or don't have much esteem. And so your whole life is designed to keep buried those threatening feelings that tend to threaten the ego sense of negation, and therefore control anxiety, which is the signal of threat of negation, where psychological pain, as I indicated before, is actually the experience of a feeling of negation. I've actually felt a feeling of worthlessness. If I'm afraid I'm going to feel a feeling of worthlessness, I'm full of anxiety. I have threat. So if you understand this, you see, and how to go into depth and how to go through the conscious, preconscious, subconscious levels relatively quickly, therapy can be very fast. So if you understand this, I'll show you how it works when I present certain cases, or if you want to present certain cases, I'll show you how quickly you get to the root of the problem. This is movement. Quite often in therapy, we go this way, around in circles. We don't get into great depth. We're not closer to the basic feelings rejected. And as long as they are rejected and they remain fixated, we remain identified with those feelings of worthlessness, insecurity, helplessness, powerlessness, weakness, inadequacy, whatever they may be. And as long as we remain identified with that, fixated upon that, it doesn't matter what's happening in life, we still believe in this. We don't mature. So, you see, the healing effect is the growth effect. Because to heal, conscious awareness unifies with this feeling, the feeling speaks and drains out, you're also not fixated anymore. You've outgrown the self-concept you've been fixated upon at the subconscious level all these years. That I'm a no-good, that I'm inadequate, because my father told me I was inadequate, showed me I was inadequate. I still live as though I'm inadequate. I still remain fixed on that conviction, that identification, at the subconscious level, irrespective of what's happening consciously. I have a PhD. So I felt inadequate before I got my PhD, and when I got my PhD, I was an inadequate feeling PhD. Nothing really changed any. You've heard of PhD depression. Quite often it's the cause of it. You know, where many people get very depressed after they get their PhD. Because they think the PhD will somehow make them feel more substantial, will change them, give them a basic sense of security, and worth, and identity. You see. And then when they get the PhD, they see it doesn't change anything, you get very depressed. I hope you understand that, because I'll be coming back to that as we discuss the issues you bring up, the questions you have, and the process of therapy. As we engage in it, you will see, if I play the role of the client, for example, what precisely I'm doing. And then you'll see what you have to do to help me in this therapeutic movement and in this therapeutic and growth effect. Because when I outgrow my feelings of inadequacy, then I'm maturing. Then I can be my real talents and abilities, and I can actualize them, and then I will become adequate, because I'll be actualizing my real potentials and abilities. Any questions so far? Before we get into your questions. Okay, so I hope you'll keep that in mind, because it's my challenge then to demonstrate to you that whatever the client brings up, this will always be in the picture, always. One of these needs will always be operative. Test it for yourself and see whether the client's behavior or conscious thinking ever reflects anything but one of these. And therefore one of these underneath, that is the relative opposite underneath. Each is an extension. So the behavior is not separate from the conscious thinking, which is not separate from the needs, which is not separate from the feelings of negation with which we're identified subconsciously. They're all an extension of each other. Therefore, dealing only with this level, or this level, is not going to change the deeper extensions and the pathological state that we're in, and the fixation and the immaturity that we remain fixated upon. Questions?
Yeah, it seems that all of those are similar on a control continuum. I mean, they're all control issues at some level.
Well, you may use control as a way of not feeling some of these, you see. But what control do you have? That itself is part of the delusion of your pathology. The fact that you believe you have a control, you have to demonstrate to me what your control is, and I'll show you right away that you can't. You can't control what I'm thinking. You might control what I say to you. I may tell you you're a nice person and elevate your sense of worth. But it won't undo your conviction of your worthlessness, nor will it change what I think about you, which may be that I may think you're totally worthless.
Excuse me, Dr. Cameron, do you have a Jan Anderson in
Yes.
here? Your husband needs to hear you calling Jan, so you won't be running all over God's creation looking for him.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
When we talk about other forms of therapy, and we're saying that they're really playing collusion with the client in a sense?
I'm afraid so.
Or not?
You know why? Because the therapist lives the same way. That's why it's raising collusion. The therapist also runs away from their pain. They also are in a state of duality. They don't know how to deal with their pain, therefore they are in collusion by some means or other. They absorb this should be, because they also live the should be's. And therefore when the client says, I don't have any control, teach me how to control, I don't have any motivation, teach me to be motivated, they'll say, of course, because that's what the therapist does himself or herself. If you do differently, you will say, wait a minute, I know you might feel better if I motivate you, but I want to understand why you're not motivated. If you're not motivated, there's a reason why you're not motivated. Maybe some part of you doesn't want to be motivated. How do I dare take allegiance with a conscious part of you that says, I want to force myself to be motivated, and not identify with a deeper part that says, I hate this stuff I'm majoring in, I don't like this whole thing, I wish I didn't major in this, which is a deeper, maybe truer voice speaking for you. So your lack of motivation may be a truer voice. It may be a more pathological voice. It may say that you want to defeat yourself. You want an excuse for hating yourself, consistent with self-concepts. Or you're afraid of the insecurity of being adequate and going out into the world and being responsible for yourself. Until I hear the why you're not motivated, I don't know how to proceed. So for me to give you that means that I must live the same way. That must be my therapy. And what I'm saying to you, it doesn't matter what therapy system you abide by, your real therapy is what you personally do when you're hurting. That's your therapy. You run into alcohol, you run into some kind of escape, some kind of distraction, then that's what you do. That's really therapy you believe in, irrespective of what technique you use. So you must understand therapy will never be a technique, because no technique can get you from here to here. You're going to have to hear what's happening, and when you hear, to help the client elicit all this, then something therapeutic can happen. So it will never be a technique. Because if you could apply a technique, you would apply it to yourself, and you'd be self-realized, self-actualized, healthy, right? The technique can't get through the repression. What you have to challenge me with most of all is, how do you open up the royal road to the repressed? How do you undo this state of duality, this state of fixation? You see, that the Freudians tried and eventually gave up, and the whole field gave up and said, we can't get at this, let's redefine, so we feel effective, let's redefine our therapy as something up here. The hypnosis didn't work, the dream interpretation didn't work, the free association didn't work because it wasn't free, the ego was controlling it. The ego will control it to make sure you don't get down to here. So it's free for a while, but then once the ego starts to sense that this is coming, it'll start to control and start looking at the pictures on the wall and start free associating about that. And so the Freudians recognized free association is free only to a point, and that the ego is not put away, so that the controlling mechanism, the defense mechanism, is not put away. Therefore, the repressed is not available to conscious awareness. That becomes the key to the whole thing. Because as long as we remain unwhole, a fragment of our wholeness, we are in a pathological state, and you're going to feel tension, you're going to feel anxiety, because this is going to always threaten to come up, and you can't function very well because you're still convinced of this as your real self. So therapy has to be that. How we do that becomes then something I have to show you if you're interested. Other questions about the process, either related to this or anything, I'll show you how it relates. Any aspect of 5 minutes or so. Any question that's related to the process? It's important to you.
It sounds like you're saying that irrespective of all of this stuff, it's the therapist is the crucial.
The therapist's ability to understand and hear what has been dualistically disowned. Without that, you can't get to first base. You're fiddling around in here, and what you'll eventually will do is help the client to feel better here by offering them different kinds of behaviors, different cognitions, which eventually will be dispelled by the power of this. Because no matter how much I tell myself, and I have evidence for the fact that I'm strong and in control and worthy, when this feeling starts to really rise because it's triggered in the world and starts to come up, I'm going to feel that panic. I'm going to feel the worthlessness. I'm going to feel the anxiety. I'm going to feel the insecurity. I'm going to feel whatever is there. My head's going to say, but you have no reason to feel insecure, and I'm still going to be shaking, and the insecurity is still going to be there. You don't believe what you think. You believe what you feel. Because if we believed what we thought, then nobody would ever be in the state hospital. We would all think positive things, beautiful things, and who would ever be sick? If we had control over what we think, everybody would control what they think, and everybody would think beautiful things of themselves. But you see, we don't. And the illusion that we can is pathological in nature. So, yes, the therapist has to grow, has to understand all of this, because if you do something with your worth, except look at it, if you do something with your insecurity, except look at it and unify with it, if you do something about your own feelings of inner deadness and numbness, then that will be what you will propose to the patient. What else can you propose? Then you're not a healer. Because if you knew how to heal, you would heal yourself first, wouldn't you? If you know how to heal, you would heal yourself first. So this is what we have to understand. So if the client comes in, the client says, well, you perceive that the client is not motivated. You don't have enough time to explore it. You definitely might think about it a little bit. How do we get the client motivated? The therapy. I suppose they hammer is a trick question. We're going to understand their lack of motivation. We're not going to try to get them motivated. We're going to understand what their lack of motivation represents as resistance, as fear, as a battle of wills to affirm their own sense of power, as their fear that we will affirm something negative in them and therefore destroy the ego entirely, whatever may be the source of that. Resistance, their lack of motivation, is not to be undone by some kind of false motivation. So we can explore that issue among any other process issues. So you're asking the question, motivation for what? Motivation for the client to do what? Well, hopefully you'll keep that in mind if you want to explore that. Or any other process issue. I'll be glad to then take any process issue you're interested in, discuss it with you, show you where it's coming from. And I think you will eventually see that what it's related to in the basic therapeutic process.
If I can interrupt, Jan found a room over in Chagles. So if everyone wants to meet over there next week, we can have it from 10 to 12. Right?
I think I'm looking forward to my episode on
Yeah, I don't know. What's his name?
Why don't we meet here again for the hour, and if the group feels they need another hour, maybe we can move over there or something. We might not need another hour. It may be a hardship for many people to make more than an hour. We don't know what's going to come up. Or if you want, we can meet there too, whatever you think. Depends on how many questions you have and how much you want to get dealt with. But I'll be glad to respond to any questions about the process.
It's at the far end. On the upstairs. Yes, what number is that? 159.
And will somebody come get me and make sure that Aware of that. Sometimes space. Where?
Laura, do you know where it is? It's room 159, which is, you know, across the parking lot, but it's at the other end of the building, Main Center. Yes.
Okay.
159 Shibels.
So we should just decide right now if we want to meet there or if we want to meet here.
Sometimes it might not be available, and then how would we get in touch with everyone?
Do we know for sure it's available next week?
No, you have to do it on a week-by-week basis.
Well, I could go over there now, but maybe we can do it every week.
Soup it then, and then
You'll get in touch with us if it's not available?
We're back here.
Yeah.
You'll be able to get in touch with everyone?
Well, if we meet over there every week, I could just go over there after the class and renew it for the next week. So
Mhm.
we'll know right there if we're not going to get it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so we'll start there next week.